the practice SAT. So let's really talk about how the PSAT points us towards the SAT. Is it a totally different test? What does it mean? Well, the cool thing that I'm so excited to share with you tonight is that about 95% or more of the content completely overlaps. The format of the sections is the same. The question types are the same. Really, the biggest difference is the length. So we go from about 5 sections and 2 hours and 10 minutes on the PSAT to 10 sections and nearly 3 or 4 hours of length. So about 4 hours on average for the SAT. There is a 25-minute essay on the SAT, which is not on the PSAT. So you're actually going to respond to a prompt and in your 25-minute allotted time period, come up with a reasonable response. You can totally do it. And it has a slightly harder bent to it. So there's a little bit of Algebra 1 and a tiny bit of Algebra 2 on the SAT, but there's no trigonometry, no super advanced math. But again, this test is intended for juniors and seniors, so it's going to be slightly more complex. The cool thing, though, as I said, is that 95% of that content overlaps. So taking the PSAT is a great preparation. One of the things you're going to have to practice, though, is the focus and the endurance and the intensity that it's going to take to move from a 2-hour test to a nearly 4-hour test. And the cool thing is that can totally be done with practice. So, as you can see, our second pie chart, if you remember the pie chart from the PSAT, it only had a few sections, 5 to be exact. So it was a much simpler pie chart, and this at first glance looks a little intimidating. But never fear, all it is essentially 2 to 3 sections, where on the PSAT there was only 1. So as you can see, we have 3 critical reading sections, 3 math sections. We're going to have some writing multiple choice sections and an essay. So again, the total time here is about 3 hours and 45 minutes. But again, keep reminding yourself, you're familiar with this format. You're familiar with the question types. You just took this test a few weeks ago. Now finally, the other thing I wanted to point out on this is that there's something called an experimental section. Some of you may see that on here and be wondering about that. What does that mean? Well, it actually means just what it sounds like. The SAT and the College Board tests out a batch of questions with every test. So there's one section, there's actually 10 sections on the regular SAT, and one of those 10 sections is a test section. The thing is, though, you're never going to know which one it is. So you need to focus, work hard, and take all 10 of those sections without trying to hyperanalyze which one there was more of. If you want to, take that out on the way home from the test and try to figure that out, that's totally fine. But what we don't want you to do is be analyzing that while you're in test-taking mode to the extent that it's taking you away from doing a good job on the test itself. All right, let's talk a little bit about SAT scoring. So as we just talked about, the PSAT is scored on a scale from 20 to 80 per section with a composite total of 240 points. Remember how we talked about adding a 0 to those sections to get your SAT score? Well, the SAT is not on a scale from 20 to 80, but rather a scale of 200 to 800, with the perfect score being a 2400. There are 3 subsections: math, critical reading, and writing. And just like on the PSAT where the average was 50, you can probably infer that the average here would be what? That's right, a 500 or a 1500 in total. So a lot of students, when I was teaching test prep, one of the most frequently asked questions that I would get from parents and from students is, well, what is a good SAT score? What should my goal be? And how I would answer that is that a good SAT score is individualized. Of course, a perfect SAT score is a 2400, but a good SAT score is the score that is best for you, the score that's going to get you into the schools that you want to attend. So if you're looking at schools that don't require standardized tests, okay then, you're good to go. But if you're looking at a school that's going to require a 2100 or higher, then that's something that you need to know, versus a school where getting an 1850 or 1900 is going to be all that you need. So again, I encourage you all to meet with your college counselors and do some research on the college process and figure out what schools would be the best fit for you, and then start doing your goal setting based around that. Okay, so another really important thing about SAT scoring is that there's sort of a scale going on here. So I'm going to go through this, and again, this might be something you have questions on, so feel free to jot those down and ask me questions after the presentation. So basically, for every question that you get correct, you're going to get 1 point added to your score, and that's really exciting. Here's the catch though. For every question that you answer incorrectly, you're actually going to get 1/4 point deducted from your score. And for every question that you leave blank and that you do not answer, you're going to get 0 points added to your score. Or in other words, your score stays the same. It neither increases nor decreases. So what does this mean? What it actually means is that you want to be strategic about the way that you take the test. You want to be thoughtful about the types of questions that you answer and the types of questions that you leave blank. For example, on the math section of the SAT, on the whole, the questions start easy, and as you get to the end of the section, say question 19 and question 20, those questions are going to be incredibly difficult, and only a small percentage of high school students will be able to answer them correctly. So if I go into the SAT and I know that the section gets harder as I go, and I also know that I'm going to lose 1/4 point for every question I ask wrong, it would be very wise of me to work slowly and carefully on as many of those easy questions as I possibly can, trying to collect all the easy points. And then I start to become increasingly cautious as I near the harder questions. And I personally would strongly consider leaving those last few most difficult SAT questions blank. Because again, I would rather get 0 points added to my score than have a -1/4 point detracted every time I miss a question. So one of the things that students really don't know, because this doesn't happen in school, they just answer all the questions, is that it's actually smarter sometimes to know your weaknesses and to know certain questions that you tend to struggle with and choose to leave them blank depending on their difficulty level. This is something, again, that we discuss in detail with our students in our classes and in private tutoring, but it's something to start thinking about, that the SAT is actually very different from what you do in school. And it's not always wise to answer every single question if it's going to cost you points when you make a mistake. So again, an important tip is to work slowly and to pace yourself and make sure you get all those easy points. And again, there's no penalty for those blank questions. And there's also no penalty for what's called a grid-in section in the math. So those questions that might freak you out a little bit because there's not actually multiple choice answers, the cool thing about that is you might as well give it a shot because you're not going to lose points for incorrect answers on the grid-in section. All right, let's change gears a little bit and talk about the ACT. But again, if you have any unanswered questions so far about the SAT, make sure you've jotted those down and you can flag me and pull me aside after the presentation. So the ACT, the other big college admissions test. This test started out in the Midwest and was traditionally used only in Midwestern schools. So a lot of parents and a lot of students aren't really sure if it's as legitimate of an exam as the SAT. And I just want to quickly clear that up and say that absolutely all colleges will accept both the SAT and the ACT. So it's really important to think about which test is right for you. Many students and many parents, of course, in this age where everything is highly competitive, strongly consider prepping for both tests. And if that's what's right for you, go right ahead. But I would encourage you to think about finding the best fit. Take a practice test. We have lots of them with Revolution here on campus throughout the year, so sign up. Take a practice test for the SAT and for the ACT, and really take a look at your scores. In addition, don't just think about your scores, but think about how you felt. Which test did you feel more comfortable on? Which one did you enjoy more? Do you like doing lots of short sections in little bursts? If so, you should try the ACT. Are you more of a marathon runner? Do you like to hunker down and just really get in math mode and do your math problems and then finish and change gears and do writing or English and then be done with that? So it's helpful to think about your own academic temperament and your personality and find the test that works better for you. So speaking specifically about the ACT, it's about as long as the SAT, although just a little bit shorter. And the interesting thing about the ACT is that it has only 4 sections: English, reading, math, and science, as well as an essay. So there's only 4 sections, and yet it's still a very long test. What can we conclude about that? Well, the way the ACT works is that it has 4 longer sections. So there's actually an hour of math and 45 minutes of reading and 35 minutes of writing and so on and so forth. So again, as I mentioned before, taking the ACT is much more like running a long distance marathon than running a series of sprints, which would be the SAT. So the scale and the way that the ACT is graded is quite significantly different from the SAT or the PSAT. Each section is scored on a scale from 1 to 36. So of those 4 sections, you could get a score somewhere between 1 to 36, and then those are all going to be averaged together to give you an overall composite score. The good news about the ACT is that they actually round up, so if you had a 24.5, that would actually result in a 25. So the national average for each section on the ACT is a 21. All right, and another pie chart. I know you guys love them so much. Here we have a pie chart that looks quite a lot like the PSAT pie chart. And again, there are only 4 sections: reading, science, English, and math. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of length to them. So you are going to kind of get in a mode of a subject and really chug along until you finish the section. As you can imagine, endurance and pace is one of the biggest things that students are challenged with on the ACT. So total time with the essay, 3 hours and 25 minutes. The essay is optional, but here at Revolution Prep, and really all of you college preparatory students, for you the essay is not optional. Any college to which you are going to submit the ACT is actually going to want to see your essay as well. So go ahead and dismiss that thought. You will be taking the essay. All right, and here's a really awesome chart, and I think I'm actually going to end here and pause the presentation at this point. This chart is really one of my favorites because, again, you're all taking the PSAT, and many of you are thinking SAT or ACT. Which test is going to be the best fit for me, and how am I going to know? So this slide is really helpful for you to kind of line up all 3 of the tests and really weigh their pros and cons and think about which one you would like to focus your prep time. So again, the PSAT, the shortest of the 3 tests, the ones you all took very recently, so it's quite fresh on your minds. There's no science section, no trig, it's multiple choice, there's a guessing penalty, and all of that stuff. So the PSAT is very much like the SAT. So both of these tests, they do not have science, they don't have advanced math, but the SAT has an essay where the PSAT does not. And finally, one of the things I haven't discussed yet that I'd like to dig into for just a moment here is sort of the fundamental and philosophical difference between the PSAT and the ACT and, the PSAT and the SAT and the ACT. The PSAT and SAT are what are called reasoning-based tests. So these tests are really trying to figure out not necessarily how much you know, but how well you think, how well you solve problems, and how well you take the test. Which is why some of you may find that you're a straight A student, you work really hard, you're really intelligent, and yet you struggle with the SAT. And your buddy Jeff slacks off in class, doesn't do his homework, and got a 2300 on his SAT without effort. What is that about? Well, what that is that Jeff, while he might not be applying himself in school, may be a really great thinker and a great reasoner. The cool thing is that this can be taught. Because this test has a specific system, you can actually learn to game it a little bit, and I'd be very happy to chat with you about that afterwards. But again, the SAT and the PSAT are reasoning-based tests, so you don't have to go home and study history. You don't have to go home and study science or mathematics other than learning simple formulae. Those are what the SAT-2s are for. Whereas the ACT is more of a content-based test. It really does help to have some knowledge in these areas, and it's less of a tricky reasoning-based test and more of seeing how you deal with a lot of information. Some other key differences between the SAT and the ACT are, again, that the SAT has a guessing penalty and that the ACT does not have a guessing penalty. And finally, the last difference I'd like you to consider is, again, the fact that the SAT has 10 short bursts of sections. So 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 10-minute, and 15-minute sections, and there are 10 of them. Whereas the ACT has 4 significantly longer sections. So again, just think about which test is the right fit for you. And again, I would be more than happy, as would my instructors, to sit down and chat with you and try to help you come to a decision about what is best for you and your student going into this important college process.